In this video, I'm going to answer the most important questions about the global site tag. All and more coming up. Hey there and welcome back to another video of Measure School, teaching you the tools, tech and tactics of today's digital marketing world. Now, my name is Julian and we are live today talking about the global site tag that was recently pushed into the interface of Google Analytics and Google AdWords. Now, I say pushed because the library or the tag itself has been around since late or beginning of September, late August. And that's when it was announced. Nobody really pushed us to install it or migrate over because it didn't bring new functionality. But Google has recently changed around the way to implement Google Analytics, but also AdWords tracking. And it's now been suggested in the interface to install this tag. I say suggested because it was really pushed because we don't find the old analytics.js code in the interface, for example, in Google Analytics, or the conversion.js code that we had in AdWords previously. It's not in there anymore, and we can copy it out and then use it on our page. This is now all replaced by the global site tag, the gtag.js. Now, I want to answer a few questions about this gtag and explore this a little bit further with you. So let's first of all jump into the demo here and look at our documentation right here. So here we are at the help section of Google Analytics. It's really about, this is more about for developers, but it shows the point really clearly that now when we want to track website and web apps, we have these three tracking libraries actually available to us. We have the gtag.js, we still have the analytics.js, which you might be used to when you were installing Google Analytics. And then we have the AMP HTML. This is obviously for accelerated mobile pages. Now we want to take a look at this new gtag.js, and this is what the code would look like once you go into your Google Analytics and you actually go to the tracking code section. You will only find this gtag.js, previously the analytics.js. Now analytics.js really still exists. It exists in parallel with the tracking library of gtag.js. So what is this all about? It was announced because Google is trying to unify the implementation of different tracking codes for their different properties. So for example, AdWords, Google Analytics, DoubleClick, all of these previously had separate different tracking libraries, and now they are all unified in the interface and with one tracking script. Now, the implementation is really the same like in Google Analytics. You would just copy this code and put it in the head section of your HTML on your all of your pages. So there's nothing really changing in terms of the implementation. The second part is that if you wanted to do any kind of configurations, so do cross-domain tracking, you would need to go through this documentation and see how you would mark this up in the actual tracking code. So if we had, for example, anonymize IP, this would have a different kind of command or function or call that you need to put into this tracking code in order to make anonymize IP work. So it changes a bit of the syntax, but it really does the same in the background. It is still sending the data like it did before to Google Analytics. So in terms of the actual technology, just the code is changing in the back end. It's still sending the same commands. Now, the next question would obviously be how would you install this, and then what are the advantages of this code? Now, Google Analytics or the Google team actually announced this because they wanted to unify the tracking. So we have that now available in Analytics, but also in AdWords. And in AdWords, we would find this here under the conversion section, for example. If we look at our codes now, we would actually see that we can only use the whoops, let's put here of done, click here, we would only have the gtag.js available, and also our a page load tag, but also a click tag that you could install. Now, this is really about once this code up here would actually also be one unified code for the remarketing. So if you install that on the page, you're already set with remarketing, but also a base tag. So like it has, it's been around for Facebook advertising, you would have a base tag for AdWords, and then also a special tag that you would install or deploy once you load a very important page on page load, or this click tracking code. Now this would then indicate a conversion, for example. Now, once you have already gtag installed with analytics, you wouldn't actually need to load the whole gtag library again. So you could just say, okay, I want to take this gtag config file and actually send the arguments over to AdWords in that way. But for now, I think that it is still in a way that you would install both tags on your site. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but right now I think that if you have Google Analytics installed with this code, you could just paste this other code below here. Now we also see in the code itself a familiar line here, which is the data layer. Now the data layer is oftentimes used in Google Tag Manager. It's this construct of sending data from the application layer, so from the actual backend of the website, making that available to Google Tag Manager and carrying it onto different other tags. And this is now something that this new tag actually adopted. So we would probably be able to push data into the data layer and then also use it later on in our G tags. Now, the advantages of that is obviously if you are completely new to the Google product suite, if you just have just want to install Google Analytics and AdWords on a new site, it would make it kind of easier because you are only dealing with one library here that actually puts everything into one place rather than having different tracking libraries like the analytics.js, the conversion.js, and so on. So really something that is something for new website owners who want to make this work on their website. Now the disadvantages are, for one, that the documentation is not very clear why we should use this, when we should use this, and so on. I read a comment here on the YouTube channel actually from Scott, and Scott is the product manager for Google Tag Manager, and he says they're working on improvements of the documentation to make this all a little bit clearer, and he explains why you should be using this as well. Now there's a bit of communication issues, and this is really due to the quick change that was made with this code, because the browser, Safari browser on Apple announced that they would change around how third-party cookies get stored on the user's browser, specifically on their browsers, obviously, on Safari, but also on the iPhone, for example. And therefore, the tracking mechanisms that we use for AdWords wouldn't be working anymore. Now, they came up with a workaround really quickly, but at the same time, they pushed forward with saying, okay, if we are changing this around, then let's change also the base tracking code, which is now gtag. So it was done really quickly, and there was no documentation at the beginning, and there was no good arguments to actually say, okay, let's switch this over to Google, the global site tag. And that's why this has brought a lot of confusion when you now log into AdWords and you just find this gtag, and all the other tutorials, like also my tutorials on my channel, are completely different. And therefore, the communication is not yet up to Google's normal standards. I would say that this will be corrected. Obviously, they work hard at work at fixing the documentation, making it more clearer why you should be actually using this. Now, from what I gathered, and I looked at different documentations, different statements from Google people, when should we actually use this tracking code? Now, the gtag is something that is mostly used for news sites. So if you have a new installation of Google Analytics and Google AdWords, you might want to use the global site tag. Unless you have very good reasons to go over to the hard-coded version of analytics.js, then you would be using the global site tag if you are installing it manually. So you are putting it in via the HTML code of your website. If you are using something like Google Tag Manager, you don't have to worry about the global site tag for now. The other possibility would be if you would have already the GTM, not the GTM, let me see let's go back here to the analytics JS. So if you have the analytics JS installed on your page, and you can just look it up by opening up your view page source here and seeing if there is analytics.js installed. So on this page, we have, for example, okay, this is not a good example because we are on the documentation page, but let's say we go here to Julian Coquette's page and see what he has installed. Probably he has Google Tag Manager installed. Tag Manager. So here we see he has Tag Manager installed, but just you could look for analytics.js, or you could look for the global site tag, gtag.js. So then you would know what code is installed. And then you could decide whether you want to switch over to the global site tag. For now, I would say that you shouldn't migrate, or there's no reason to really migrate from analytics.js to gtag.js. The same calls are still called in the same order, so nothing will break in your implementation if you don't upgrade. I wouldn't say really upgrade or migrate over to gtag.js. Now, Julian Coquette has made up a blog post here, which is quite interesting. He made this little flows chart. And the first question you need to ask yourself really is, are you using Google Tag Manager or TMS? And if the TMS already supports Google Analytics and there's a tag template for it, so if you have Adobe DTM or Telium, you might be set with that, but with Google Tag Manager, you obviously have already a tag template. So if you go over here to tags and we click on new, we actually have tag templates for Google Analytics. That will actually deploy the analytics.js, and you wouldn't actually need to worry about the global site tag. If they update Google Tag Manager, they will do it in the background. So we wouldn't actually need to look at the codes in itself. We actually have everything in Google Tag Manager. We wouldn't need to update this ourselves because this could be done in the background as well. A big advantage of Google Tag Manager. Let's go back here. So if you're using a TMS, then you're pretty much set if you are already using Google Analytics. If you don't have a tag template in your TMS, you might want to look at the gtag.js through a custom HTML tag, for example, or just keep using the analytics.js if you have that all prepared. There is no difference really in terms of deploying one or the other with a TMS. Now, if you don't have a TMS, then I would strongly recommend to installing one. I'm a big fan of Google Tag Manager, obviously you know that. And I would definitely think about, if you have a new website, why not use Google Tag Manager? It would make your life so much easier. Now, there are some cases where you say, okay, we don't use any tag management system. We just want to add our Google Analytics on there. If you want to do that, then you can use the global site tag. And here the question is, are you masochistic? Well, if you are, then you can use Google Universal Analytics or the single tracking code and go straight to gtag.js, or still use analytics.js. That is really right now the question. But since Google is already pushing it in the interface, I would actually recommend, if you are completely new to Google Analytics, completely new to Google AdWords, don't have any tags installed yet, go to the gtag.js. Okay, now the migration, really, do you need to migrate? I would say no. There's actually some disadvantages, like we saw here in the blog post from Enor, that Google tag, this new global site tag actually doesn't support content experiments, task, and custom plugins. Now, these are really customizations that you might do to your Google Analytics code, and therefore, if you have them already installed in your Analytics.js, you don't have to migrate over. It doesn't make any sense. The disadvantages are really that maybe you won't have these different capabilities anymore. But again, content experiments is something that's probably going away anyways because we have now Google Optimize. So I would say that for now, don't touch your Google Analytics code. Don't touch your conversion.js if it all works already. Now, the other question that you might have: what if I use already Google Tag Manager? Should I change this over to the global site tag? Now, if you look at this list here, you actually see that there is no tag template for Google, the global site tag, and this wouldn't make really a lot of sense because Google is trying to unify their codes into the global site tag, and in the backend they are still sending the right calls to AdWords or to Google Analytics, and therefore maybe you could describe the gtag as something that is a mini version of Google Tag Manager without the fancy interface. It just unifies some of the codes and has some advantages here, but in the back end, they are still using the same calls that go over to Google Analytics. So you could do the same from Google Tag Manager. So there's actually no tag template here to install the G tag. You could obviously do it through the custom HTML tag, but I wouldn't recommend this because I would actually say that we have these tag templates. And if you want to install the Universal Analytics, all you would need to have is your tracking ID, which you would still find in the same place up here, and don't need to mess with the global site tag. Now with AdWords, it's a bit more tricky. We made another video on this because if you are looking for your conversion ID and so on, these are actually now hidden in this conversion page load tag. So right here you would have your conversion ID, and this would be your label, and this would probably also hopefully be made better by the actual do we have it now in here? No, this would actually also make better in the documentation. Hopefully we'll get this button back installed through Google Tag Manager. So this is all a little bit clearer, but it is still possible to install AdWords, for example, through Google Tag Manager with the conversion ID and the conversion label. So if you're using Google Tag Manager, the only thing that you might want to, or you need to install, or you might want to install if you are using the AdWords conversion tracking. Additionally, you should install the conversion linker tag. So this is this new tag, conversion linker tag. Now, this conversion linker tag will actually pick up the information from the GCLID that is attached to the URL, to the landing page, and push it into a first-party cookie, so we can still have the conversion tracking abilities that we had before. Everything about this is explained in another video, so I'd recommend to check this out. Okay, so this is about the Google site tag. Now, just to summarize our whole discussion here, the site tag is really a new tag that was pushed into the interface and announced a few months back by Google, and is now the tag that I want you to use if you install Google Tag Manager for the first time and Google AdWords conversion tracking for the first time. Now, your existing tracking won't break by not using the global site tag, and you don't have to migrate. If you're using Google Tag Manager, keep using the tag templates, and then you will be all set with your tracking. The only exception would be the AdWords tracking, where there's also the change going on with the Safari browser. Check out our video about conversion tracking with AdWords to see how to install the conversion tracking via Google Tag Manager. All right, so I hope you have understood everything and this was all clear. Now, if you like this video, as always, please give us a thumbs up and also subscribe to this channel right over there, so you'll stay up to date with these live streams that we do occasionally. If you click that bell icon as well, then you'll get notified next time we go live, and then I'll answer your questions as well. Now, my name is Julian. Till next time.